Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hi, welcome to Parrot TV Literary Corner. I'm your noble and honest host, Dustin Pickering. Today we have Craig Wright, whose most recent book, The Hidden Habits of Genius, is the outgrowth of his popular Yale University course, Exploring the Nature of Genius. It represents a multiple decade study of geniuses throughout history, including Einstein, Curie, Mozart, Bezos, Jobs, Picasso, Ben Franklin, and Lady Gaga, among them, as well as personal observations gleaned from watching geniuses in action at Harvard, Yale, and elsewhere. Each chapter identifies one or more enablers of genius and concludes with suggestions as how such agents can be incorporated into everyday life. Craig Wright is a graduate of the Eastman School of Music, holds an MA and PhD from Harvard, and taught at Yale for 44 years, where, as the Moses Professor of Music Emeritus, he continues to teach the Genius course online each summer. Wright has been the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, an honorary doctorate of humane letters of the University of Chicago, and in 2011 was elected a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Hi, Dr. Wright, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you very much, Dustin, for inviting me. And as you may be able to see, I don't know whether you're filming this or
Yes.
just doing an audio record. You are filming it. You can see, first thing that you will notice immediately when talking with me is, one, I'm no genius, and two, I haven't spent a lot on clothing to prepare for today.
Right.
I'm sitting here in the t-shirt talking with you, but I'm delighted to be invited and delighted to engage the topics that we'll be discussing today.
So what originally drew you to the subject of genius?
Interesting. I kept going to all of these Tony's expensive schools where I would bump into these people that seemed really talented. And I realized that I was not hugely talented. So I started watching these people do these extraordinary things. And then it occurred to me one day that maybe the people that are best at analyzing situations in life are not necessarily the same people that are really good at doing things. Maybe an analyst has an advantage if that analyst is standing outside whatever metaphor you want to use, the box, the arena, whatever, looking in because they can see better what's going on. I got interested in this through my initial interest in classical music. I was trained to be a classical pianist. Pretty soon saw I was never going to earn a dime doing that, although I have graduated from the Eastman School of Music with a degree in piano. But then I went to Harvard to become a musicologist, for heaven's sakes, what is that? A historian of music. That was interesting, but kind of limited in sphere. Then this movie came out. It was really exciting. Amadeus, 1984, I believe, won 8 Academy Awards. Did you ever see that, Dustin?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
What a movie. What a film.
It was an extraordinary thing. I said, well, this is really cool, this Mozart person. I got to dig into this more. So I started going around the world, to Berlin and the Krakow and Vienna and Salzburg and Paris and all around the world in successive summers or leaves of one sort or another. To find out if this was really true. Could one person have in one's head all this extraordinary music and just kind of have it pop out or explode out? And lo and behold, judging from the primary source manuscripts, the autograph manuscripts, it was pretty much true. He didn't rewrite things very much. Beethoven did. Beethoven was always redoing things, and his sketches and drafts and manuscripts look like train wrecks, but not Mozart. He really had it all in his head. So from that, then I started reading about Leonardo da Vinci and then more about Albert Einstein and began to see commonalities between these figures, these things that I call the enablers of genius, and began to track them more and more and then expand this out to more and more characters. So that's a long-winded way of saying how I got interested in this.
Okay, so in the book, how do you define genius and where do you derive that definition?
Aha! Funny you should ask me, because I have. That's the one thing I happen to have handy here, a definition of genius, and it's really sort of amusing almost that all of these people that write about genius, and genius using titles of books, movies, magazine articles, whatever,
Mhm.
they almost never define what genius is. It's just
Right.
assumed we know what it is, but
Mhm.
we don't all agree to what it is. So
Right.
after flailing around here for a long period of time, I came up with the definition of genius, which I will read to you
Okay.
with your permission, Dustin.
Sure.
Quote, a genius is a person of extraordinary mental powers whose original works or insights change society in some significant way for good or ill across cultures and across time. Okay, so
Hmm.
that's what I wrote as a definition in the book. Now, Dustin, can you remember that definition? Can you repeat that definition back to me word for word? No.
Not quite.
No. Nobody can do that. It's a bad move on my part. There should be a simpler sort of definition
Mhm.
that people that kind of incorporates the spirit there, but
Mhm.
does so in a way that that people can remember. And then it occurred to me one day that Einstein said something about that. Genius is simply simplifying things down to their essence. He said it more eloquently than I just did. But that's essentially what goes on with an equation. You just have this simple thing like E, and then you've got this this thing on the other side of the sign equals mc squared. And this hugely complex phenomenon simplified. Okay, Craig, let's see if you could do this. So here's Craig's equation for genius, and it is G equals S times N times D. Genius equals significance times the number of people impacted, that's the N, times the duration of the impact. So
Hmm.
it's genius is significance uh, intersecting with the number of people involved, intersecting with the time of this impact or involvement.
Mhm.
That's kind of the way I like to think about it. It works for me.
That's interesting. And I like that you came up with an equation for that that kind of fits, I mean, kind of teasingly into the E equals MC squared. You sort of have this equation for genius that really what it seems to boil down to is the matter of influence. And I wondered if you had an answer to this question. Is there a way to recognize the genius prior to that influence? For
Um,
example, like Van Gogh or somebody like that, he wasn't really a huge influence in his lifetime, but obviously he's made an impact in
Yeah,
his.
that's a good point. And I actually try to address this point with
Mhm.
my students, which reminds me I got to do that tomorrow.
Mhm.
Set up this little kind of thought exercise for them, a kind of Einstein thought problem.
Mhm.
Um, if Einstein himself were on a desert island and could think up all these amazing things like E equals mc squared and both forms of theory of relativity and the photoelectric effect and the theory of Brownian motion and activity within an atom. But he chose not to communicate. He said, I got it all figured out here. But he said, nah, in the vernacular, screw them. I'm going to keep this to myself.
Mhm.
Would Einstein still have been a genius? Well, according to my definition, really he wouldn't have,
Right.
because there'd be no impact
Mhm.
there. So it's a kind of the potential of genius, or genius is imminent, but it is not outside. It doesn't engage. So with my definition, which sort of holds things to a higher standard in a way,
Mhm.
I would argue that to be a genius, one must have impact. So when you say, is someone a genius before they are recognized as such, before they have impact, I would say they're a genius in potentia, a
Okay.
potential genius. And if circumstances work in their favor over a period of time, then that impact may well come. And it may well be that period of anonymity may last a long period of time. For Bach was about 75 years. You mentioned Dustin there a moment ago, Vincent van Gogh. That was about 1922. He died, I think, in 89. So that's about what, 35 years, I'm guessing 35 years or so, but anybody start really paying any attention to Van Gogh. And the
Right.
most famous case is this guy, a person, Jan Vermeer, who was painting in the 1650s or so, and really wasn't fully recognized, and nobody was exhibiting his paintings until the 1850s. So he sat there for about 200 years, and nobody was paying much attention. So it's an interesting sort of game. It becomes a kind of philosophical
Right.
exercise as to how you want to define this sort of thing, and what your criteria are, and how you want to manipulate them. It's kind of fun to do with undergraduate students because it forces them to think about things.
Interesting. And I think it's funny, it's like you have it that, in the case of the artist you mentioned, like 200-year silence before recognition at all. That's just fascinating how these various periods work out.
It goes the other way too.
Right.
People that are geniuses today are totally forgotten.
Right.
50 years from now. I could name some names.
Entirely possible. Yeah, I think so. I guess it fluctuates. Like you said, the definition is very, very flexible in a lot of ways, and it depends on the as you said, the duration and the number of people impacted and so forth.
Yeah. So an interesting way of thinking about that, there was this high-end philosopher, German Romantic philosopher, floating around around 1820, Arthur Schopenhauer.
Mm-hmm.
The world is something. I forget.
World is will and representation.
Good for you, Dustin. Dustin gets an A today. You're absolutely right. Say that again, nice and loud.
World
Dustin.
is will and representation.
Thank you. Okay. Dustin is promoted to the Pickering Professor of Philosophy at the Parrot Literary Corner. Good for you. Okay, so it is Arthur Schopenhauer, World as Will and Representation, and what he gives us there is one of the most interesting definitions of genius of all, which is a person of talent hits a target that nobody else can hit. A person of genius hits a target that nobody else can see. Okay, so where are we going with that? The reason that some of these people, that target is what society thinks is good, is continually moving through the ages, probably in each culture. And somebody gets an idea, they're going to shoot an arrow out there, an idealization in the form of an arrow. Out it comes, and it hits the target. Maybe this arrow gets shot and goes right by the target, and nobody's noticing, but eventually that target comes right in to the bullseye zone, and suddenly that person becomes a genius. Or so often, you watch this with Paul McCartney. My favorite example is McCartney in the song Queenie Eye, which I thought was a great song. I kind of grew up as a kid with the Beatles in the 60s listening to all this stuff. And if McCartney had produced Queenie Eye back in the 60s, it would have been probably the 33rd of the Beatles' #1 hits. But it went nowhere. The highest it ever got, I got interested in it. Why does nobody like this one? It got to number 33 on the bestseller charts in Poland. That's and I'm not trying to denigrate Poland. It's a very interesting place. But the point is that he was still firing his arrow, the same arrow in the same direction, and that target had moved. And his arrow is now missing. And I think that's what happens a lot with ideas and society and change over time.
Right. So also in The Secret Habits of Genius, you note that sometimes a crisis can precipitate great creative activity. Why do you think that's the case?
It's a very interesting idea. And it was an idea given to me by a person that I have a great deal of respect for, still very much alive, Marin Alsop. She is, if you would name, who's the best known female conductor in the world today? It would be Marin Alsop. We think of maybe Leonard
Bernstein.
Bernstein, or you can name virtually any one of a number of conductors. And my favorite maybe is this guy, Gustavo Dudamel, out there, the Venezuelan out there in the Los Angeles Philharmonic. But you can pick any of these people, but there's almost no female conductors out there, which is an interesting issue by itself. But one time I had the honor of having lunch with her, and we were talking about this issue, and I said, well, why was that person a prodigy but never developed into a real creative voice, a creative genius? He said, well, she said, I think it has a lot to do with trauma. That there are instances when people experience some kind of trauma in their life, that it changes them and it puts them in a sort of outsider perspective that allows them to develop an independent vision. That's an interesting idea, trauma as pain. And then I started looking through the number of people in my book, which I dance through sometimes in great detail, spend years reading about Einstein or obviously Mozart or Virginia Woolf and stacks this high, but with others just peripherally. But it's astonishing in there the number of people, maybe 40%, who had a parent die at a very early age. So that's not to say that you should go out and wish your parent gets in a car accident or something like that. We don't want to wish ill upon people. You don't go out and search for it. But it is an interesting notion that, and then I came upon this quote of Dylan Thomas, who's a poet who died at a very early age, who said, the only thing worse than an unhappy childhood is a too happy childhood.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you want to be creative, if you want to change the world, I'll leave it to Beaver. Childhood home environment's probably not the best way to do that.
Right. So this is kind of an interesting question. What are some other lessons, some genuine lessons that a common person can learn from the art of genius?
Lots of things. Most important thing to be a genius is be curious. Mm-hmm. Spend your whole life being curious. Don't worry about failing. I could make a long list of all the things. Mm-hmm. I failed at, but and then I bumped into this remark once of well, it gets traced all the way back to Socrates, but it was articulated most recently by Oprah Winfrey. Said, there's no such thing as failure. Failure is just turning you in a different direction. Look upon failure as a teaching opportunity. So get out there, be curious, get involved in things, fail. You'll learn stuff. My own construction is, and I don't think I've ever heard this from, have you ever heard this anywhere, Dustin? Pain is the great agent of memory. It's similar to no pain, no gain. But the things we remember, and you don't remember your successes all that much.
Right.
What you remember, what's emblazoned in your head, seared in your head, are your failures. And God, how could I have been so stupid? How did I do that? So don't look upon these failures as negatives. Look upon them as learning opportunities, teaching opportunities. Mm-hmm. I've learned to do that in my own life. When things go wrong, I usually get angry or whatever. Don't other ways of looking at this. Take them as learning experiences. So that's one thing that I think that I have learned. Another thing, I could go on and on about this. I've learned to use relaxation as a way of being more creative, and I do talk about that in the book. There's a whole chapter on relax. It's just called Relax. And that's been a very interesting thing too. Reading and learning about exercise, about what happens when you listen to music, what happens when you engage with nature, what happens when you go to the seashore and just look at water, what happens when you take a shower, and most importantly, the interrelation between your mental functioning, your creativity, and sleep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could go through issues and all of these issues. It's a very long subject. We don't want to go through nature, exercise, sleep, showers, that kind of thing, because we don't have time for it. But if you want to peek there in the book, there's some beginnings of that there, and that's my next project, is to sort of work on that idea a bit. I think we underutilize our capacity to relax. I think we think we are being lazy when we are relaxing, but there's a way we can relax. Meditation is another
Right.
way. We can relax and be hugely creative and hugely productive. That's another part of this. And the most important thing, I think, is probably eventually say, find your passion. You know, you go to these commencement exercises and everybody will stand up, every speaker say, students, go find your passion. Or follow your passion. Now, what 21-year-old knows what their passion is, for God's sake? What they know is they have a lot of student debt. They got to get a job. Got to pay the bills, put food on the table, pay the car payments, do that kind of thing. You don't have time to. But eventually, as you bounce around through life, you kind of, maybe you find out what your passion is opportunity shut. You find out what your passion is not. Maybe your passion was not that last job, and you move on to another.
Right.
Eventually, you find out what your passion is. But that's hugely important, I think, particularly as you get older, because if you don't have a passion, what the heck's going to get you up in the morning? What's going to keep you out? What's going to force, say to yourself, well, I'm going to work out because if I don't do this, I'm going to die, and then I won't be able to execute my great dream. But it's really that great dream that's having that dream, having that goal in life is hugely important. And my favorite saying in this regard is that of the sculptor Henry Moore, who said the most important thing in life is have a passion. Having a passion that you bring your every fiber to every day, every minute of every day. But the most important thing is it's a passion that you cannot possibly accomplish.
Interesting. There's a lot of passages in the book about optimism. Also, I think that's something you say, that people who are optimistic live longer. I
can demonstrate that statistically. And that was one thing. I think that's a little bit of my own research here. How long do geniuses live? They outlive the average person by about 10 years. So that's hugely important. But I also believe it personally. On a personal note, I once had 7 years ago, I had a stroke, semi-serious stroke. And coming out of that, and all kinds of tests and all kinds of neurologists, at the end of the day, one was a resident fellow, not the prime neurologist, came to me and said, and he was of Indian descent. He said to me, the most important thing for you staying alive is to remain optimistic. It seemed like a weird thing to say at the time, take your blood thinner or whatever, or watch your blood pressure. But what he said was a psychological thing. Remain optimistic. Yeah. Because there are studies that show that optimists outlive pessimists by a long degree, and my own work on this shows that geniuses outlive the average person in the population also by about the same number of years that optimists outlive pessimists.
That's quite fascinating. I must have missed the passage about geniuses living longer, or maybe I don't remember it. I do remember
it's in the wrong place. it's in chapter 7, at the end of the chapter 7 of the book, but that my editor wanted it to go there. It should be somewhere else.
Yeah, because I remember reading the optimists live longer, and I thought that was fascinating. That makes a lot of sense, because if you let go of some of those burdens when you look at the better side of things, and as you were mentioning earlier, back to the seeing, shortcomings is not as necessarily as devastating failures to make you angry or upset, but more as learning opportunities, maybe for preparation for something in the future you could look forward to, something nicer that maybe coming your way that you may have needed to have learned this little trick that you messed up on a little bit better, So
failure is just life turning you in a different direction.
right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest, as far as resource material to learn more? Obviously you have this copious bibliography, but do you have any specific works that you consulted that were really instructive for you when you were writing this book?
Well, it's an interesting question, Dustin. What I started to read, I guess, is what I love to read. And it takes you a while to find out what you really love in life. What I love to read is biographies of people. And in that book, I would like to think there's a fair amount of substance about genius in that book, a fair amount of philosophy in a way. But the reviewers of the book and the people that I talk to, they don't seem to focus on it quite the way that what they come up to me and say is, I love the stories in your book. So I always like reading stories of biographies of people. If I were to pursue this and want to read some of the books that I was reading, there's one person out there for whom I have a great deal of respect, and that's Walter Isaacson. Walter Isaacson used to run CNN. Now he is essentially, I think he has a title of professor of history or something like that at Tulane. But basically, he has sufficient resources that he can have research teams and things like that. And he writes really splendid biographies. And let me tick off a couple of them in order. I would say the one that I got the most out of was Isaacson's biography of Albert Einstein. I also very much enjoyed Isaacson's biography of Benjamin Franklin. I would also recommend his biography of Leonardo da Vinci. I liked it less well, and I didn't think it was his fault, his biography of Steve Jobs. I think Steve Jobs was somewhat of a closed book, and it was hard to get in. There wasn't really good source material there that he could work with, unlike Einstein or unlike Ben Franklin. He has another book, I guess it's downstairs, I was going to read, about Jennifer Doudna. Now, so here we have a woman who recently won the Nobel Prize for medicine and physiology. She shared it with Emmanuel Charpentier, I think, of France. But that's also quite interesting because of the moral issues there having to do with gene editing, CRISPR, the virus vaccines. It's fascinating. It's saving our bacon here today. But gene editing also holds out the capacity not only to remove genetic maladies from the planet, but also to remove things from the planet that actually may be very beneficial to us. So that's a particularly interesting kind of philosophical, moralistic ethics question that Walter Isaacson is engaging in that most recent book. I think it's called Codebreaker, and it has a picture of Jennifer Doudna, who used to teach at Yale now, but far more recently has been teaching it at Berkeley.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm familiar a little bit with like the Genome Project and stuff like that, and how they were discussing possibly altering genes where that you could get rid of like mental illness or certain things that maybe even like we talk about geniuses. A lot of times they have mental health issues that actually promote their capabilities. So
yeah, that's right. You got to be careful what you wish for here, because if it may be possible to remove blindness. It may be possible to remove Huntington's disease. It may be possible to remove certain types of breast cancer. It may be possible to eliminate sickle cell anemia, all of which would seem like a very good thing. But you have to be careful because it's complicated. Let's say you wanted to remove schizophrenia. I read that there are 80 different genes involved in the production of that mental condition, mental disorder, schizophrenia. And in removing those 80, you may be removing some sources of creativity.
right.
Maybe it's the same things that allowed Van Gogh to be Van Gogh.
Right.
So we don't want that. Presumably, we don't want that to happen. And the same
Right.
thing with Beethoven. We could probably, an odontologist or whatever those guys are called that do the cochlear implants, we could have done,
Mhm.
if we, in theory, today we could do that with Beethoven, but
Right.
the music would have sounded probably a lot different than what we know.
It's an interesting thought experiment to
Yeah,
think about what may have been if they had been cured of their ailments. That's an
yeah,
interesting idea to think about if it would have changed the altered the nature of their work, you know. If Beethoven had had a happy romantic life, would he been so passionate a pianist, you know?
that's right. Yeah, maybe happy wife, happy life, but no genius
Right.
kind of thing. Yeah, that's a good point, Dustin. Yeah.
So how much of a role would you say that, I mean, you mentioned a lot of poets and poetry in the book. How much would you say that plays in your life and writing?
It's a very interesting, poets, on the subject of mental disorder, they have the
Mhm.
highest rate of mental disorder. Um,
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah. But it's fascinating to think about poetry and the way their minds work, because essentially they are gifted with the capacity for analogous thinking. If you
Mhm.
think about what's in poetry, it's all metaphor and simile, which you're comparing things that are not exactly the same, but pretty close to the same, but can be linked together in ways that nobody's ever linked them before. And
Mhm.
essentially, that's what comedians do. That's what
Mhm.
humorists do. That's what jokes are. But
Right.
that takes um, a particularly skilled type of mind. And when that can be combined, that kind of unexpected contrarian thinking can be combined with things of aesthetic value, whether it be sound, like who was it? Poet Victor Hugo
Mhm.
said, music is the poetry of the air, or it can be visual images. If you can combine things that are kind of spiritually, emotionally pleasing that have never been combined before, well, that's really exciting. That's really very special. And that, in essence, is what poetry is. And maybe it's the highest of all arts, and maybe the
Mhm.
greatest of all poets, and maybe the greatest of all geniuses was Shakespeare, because he could do
Absolutely.
that like nobody else. Yeah.
So I've read some of the Amazon reviews of the book, and I found some negative ones I wanted to bring in and see if what you had to say. There was one that said that you didn't respect genius as like a work ethic. You were attributing it to luck and to place and things of this nature. Like what's his name? The other writer that's right. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Malcolm Gladwell. They said some of the same things about him. So I was just wondering, how do you respond to that?
Um, you know, I'm too old to be outraged. um, and I have learned that, and I tell my students, and this is the way I'm teaching classes these days. I have this genius book. I'm teaching this genius course. Now, their first paper assignment is go out, read my definition of genius, and tell me why it's all wrong.
Hmm.
Because I think it will encourage critical thinking. And,
Right.
and as time goes on, I learn it's not handing people a nugget of wisdom, quote unquote, but get youngsters, you want them to be independent thinkers, critical thinkers.
Right.
So I don't get angry if uh, uh, if somebody simply misunderstood something, and in this particular case, it may be just not reading carefully or misunderstanding. Um,
Hmm.
but but I think it was the second or third review that I saw. It was a review written in German, and it's the
Hmm.
only one-star review on Amazon that this book has gotten. It's sort of 65% 5 stars, 22% 4 stars, and one star. But who's counting? No, that's a
Right.
joke. That's a joke. The fact that I know that's the fact that I know these statistics belies what I just said. I actually am tracking this, but this was in German, and but you can click a button there. says translate into
Mhm.
English. And I knew exactly where this guy was right. And it was the lowest ranking that this thing got, because he was coming at this as a reviewer from a completely different point of view. He was a German, and maybe having come out of East Germany, an East German Marxist historian.
Mhm.
And the whole notion of genius does not map well onto a communist historiography and a
Right.
communist economic system. It's the exact opposite of that. So he accused me of being much like Elon Musk and Angela Merkel, having the same mindset. Now, I was thrilled to be grouped with those people. I think
Mhm.
they're both. I was thinking about Angela Merkel just today, because there was a piece. She's coming to Washington. She's the first first head of state to be recognized by Joe Biden with an official visit. She's
Mhm.
really very important and tends to be underrated, underestimated, I think. So that kind of review I can respect, because it's from a different philosophical basis. It has a different definition of genius. It doesn't believe in genius. It believes in society. It believes in there's a little bit of genius in all of us, that those that are put out there as names such as Elon Musk or Angela Merkel are simply building on the work of everybody else, and that this is something of a alpha male white capitalist scam, this
Right.
whole notion of genius. Okay, but fair enough. Good point well taken.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We'll go ahead and close out the show. This is the book here, if I can get it to see it where it doesn't. Hidden Habits of Genius. If anybody wants to check that out, it's definitely a wonderful book. I read it myself about a month or two ago, and I enjoyed it very much. But thank you again for joining us. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I think we've learned quite a bit. So everybody out there, keep an eye out. You never know where we'll be tomorrow. This is the Parrot Literary Corner, and I'm Dustin Pickering, and we're doing an anthology, so be prepared to submit your work. Today is the deadline, and we will be doing pre-orders, so keep an eye out for that information. And so that will be pretty soon. Today we'll hopefully have the announcement out for how to do that and get that going. For our poets and writers who've been involved with us from the show, thank you very much for being involved with us. We're keeping this thing going. We're looking for 1 million subscribers. We're not going to stop until we get to that number. So please keep an eye out and keep hitting that subscribe button. Everybody out there, share our stuff and share our content, and you will be instantly in touch with us as soon as we put something up. You will see it, and that'll be immediate, and you can share it with your friends, family, coworkers, neighbors, anybody that likes poetry, art, creative work. So please keep an eye out for us. And we're looking for donations, and anybody out there would like to donate to support our programming, it's at paypal.me/nyparrot, and that will be on the YouTube station on this video as well as others. And you also can contact me if you'd like a spot on the show at Literary Corner at newyorkparrot.com. That's Literary Corner at newyorkparrot.com. Keep an eye out for this anthology news. It'll be coming out soon. And thank you for joining us again, Dr. Wright. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. This is Dustin Pickering signing off with the Parrot Literary Corner. Thank you all out there. Have a great day. Got our guy here to, where'd he go? We're gonna get stuck here for a minute. I'm not sure what happened to our producer.
That's fine. I'm sure he can cut it after.
Yeah, I think he'll be all right. We'll just hang out until it cuts off. It'll cut off after a few minutes, after a few more seconds.
Yeah, I'm sure you can edit this as you wish. Well, thank you for inviting me. That was fun.
You're very
question.
welcome.
Yeah,
very
good
welcome.
questions.
Thank you for joining us, for your
good discussion.
very wonderful discussion. Yes, I think so.
So if you get it up, and maybe send me an email, just a link, and I'll check it out. Yeah. So you're really pushing for 1 million subscribers?
Well, yes, trying very hard.
Yeah. Well, have you got over 10,000 so far?
Not quite yet, but we're working on it. We plan on doing this for a while. We'll keep pushing